at the end of my 1 year, it's not like Connecticut has a chance to win in whatever it is, because you look at what we do for a living in a career, it's about continuous improvement. And that's all that I look at from this, is leveraging what's been started for decades and decades. I mean, CBI has been around for hundreds of years, right? And, how do we continue to use CBI as a bridge, as a voice to continue to affect legislation, continue to affect business owners, continue to affect business leaders, to continue to help make Connecticut a much better place, a much more affordable place.
Welcome back to the CBIA BizCast powered by Google. I'm Amanda Marlowe. Today, we are very excited to be joined by the president and CEO of HABCO Industries, Brian Montanari. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
We are very excited to have you. You not only wear that hat, but you have now been recently elected as the chair of CBIA's board of directors. Congratulations.
Thanks. The things we do for Deep Pentima.
I just wanted to start off by, we definitely want to talk about you and your company and, your involvement in CBIA, but really let's learn a little bit more about you first. How did you first get involved in manufacturing?
Yeah, I've been involved in manufacturing for my whole career. Kind of happenstance, wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do for a living. I went off to school to study finance, and here I am working in manufacturing. And it started back when I was in college. I was driving fork trucks as a summer job at the wire mold company in West Hartford. Worked there for a couple of years as a summer help, offsetting the employee base that would go away on their summer vacations. And I, to be honest, hated it. It wasn't something I really wanted to do. It was one of those things, starting off 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and, spending all day in the warehouse doing that. After doing that for 2 summers, I was looking to move off and go into finance, and head of HR at Wire Mold called me and asked me if I wanted to come back for another summer. And I said no. I was ready to go get an internship, and they offered me an internship at Wire Mold. And so I worked in the lean office and the just-in-time in the JIT office. And that's really where my career started really to solidify, to realize that that's what I really want to do. I really enjoyed the idea of affecting the bottom line as opposed to just analyzing it. And so I started off, I had a great mentor at the Wire Mold company. His name is Steve Brown. I worked for him for a little bit, and then he took me with him to 2 additional companies after the Wire Mold company. So I worked at a wire and cable company, C&M Corporation here in the state, worked for him there. And then he left to take over a medical device manufacturer in Wallingford called Novametrics, which became Respironics, which became Philips. So then I went there and worked with him again for a couple more years. So my entire first part of my career, even though it was 3 different companies, it was the same boss for quite some time. And it was a really good indoctrination to a career in manufacturing. And I just absolutely loved it and had the opportunity. Well, we kind of split ways. The business was sold, and he went off and did his thing. And I started working for another company in Connecticut called HID, where they make ID badges, the cards and readers. Started off being responsible for the North Haven facility. And then within a few months, I had global responsibility, which was at the time 6 facilities in 5 countries. And then within a year, that was 14 facilities in 9 countries. And I was in Europe and Asia more than I was home, which at the wrong time of my life, when my second child was born and she was 4 days old, I went to Zurich for 2 weeks on a joint venture. That was a self-correcting error.
Yeah.
But my whole career has been in manufacturing, and it's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Was there anything that you learned from, that your original mentor that you try and carry with you now?
Yeah, I mean, Steve was great, but I would say it was more it was Steve, but also the entire executive team at Wire Mold. Art Byrne, Ori Fumi, Ed Miller, Steve Maynard, that whole crew, Frank Giannatasio. And it's interesting because when you talk about where my career is today, all those folks are investors in HABCO. And so it's really been interesting for me for my whole career to come full circle. But the biggest, one of the stories I tell, my first experience full time with Wire Mold, I thought I was going to be going to the West Hartford facility, and I got a call from HR that said, and she said, all right, Betty said, instead of coming into West Hartford, you're going to meet Art Byrne, the CEO. You're going to meet him at the airport, and you guys are going to fly to Memphis and do a Kaizen event together down in Memphis. I immediately got a little anxious. And of course, I know who Art is. I've been watching him. He's written about in all these books. I don't even know if he knows my name, doesn't know who I am. And, we showed up at the airport, and, whether he knew who I was or Betty prepped them properly with a picture, he came right up to me. We started having a conversation in the gate. We started boarding the plane, and I thought, I I thought he was going to go and board early in business class, and he just waited. And he got on the plane with me, and I thought sure enough, he'd sit in his seat in the front of the plane. He didn't. He sat in the back of the plane, and we landed, and we go to Schlotsky's Deli in the car, in the rental car. And he said, "Did you bring a change of clothes?" Because I was dressed business casual. I said, "I did." I said, "What? Am I not dressed appropriately?" He says, "We're going to work. Do you have jeans and a t-shirt?" And I said, "I do." And we went to the hotel and changed, and spent the entire week tearing down racks and physically doing improvement projects. And that was, I think, one of the most instrumental parts of my career, to see here's the CEO of the company, doesn't need to be doing this. A, he knew my name. B, he sat in the back of the plane. And C, he was sweating more than anybody else that was on that Kaizen event and physically tearing racks down. And that has stuck with me from day one. That's the type of leadership that I've tried to, emulate in my own way. But being a leader that is not afraid to get hands dirty. And my team knows now, if they can't find me, I go back to my roots, and I'm driving the fork truck in our warehouse, because sometimes that's my stress relief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. And, really full circle now.
Yeah. It's really great that they've, I learned from them, and then that whole crew trusted me for them to invest in HABCO when we bought the business 13 years ago. And it's just been amazing to represent them, and to grow the business based off the things I learned early in my career.
Yeah. And then something certainly that your employees see and can appreciate as well, where you started driving those work trucks.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me a little bit more about HABCO itself, kind of what you guys do and the employees that you, that work for you.
Yeah. So HABCO is in the aftermarket of the aerospace industry. I say it often, it's kind of the non-sexy part of the industry, and I love it. Look at me, I'm not sexy to begin with, so it's a perfect spot for the business to be in. And I love it because it's always the part that's needed. You might have new aircraft, new engines, new components that are going on the engine, but once it's in service, now it needs to be maintained. And the sustainment side of the industry is really interesting. It's usually an afterthought for a lot of the companies. Our tagline is "It matters." When you take a look at, I know some of the IT firms think it means IT matters, and it is absolutely not what our tagline is. It matters because, when it matters for a customer, it has to matter for us. And if it's an afterthought or not something properly planned, it doesn't matter. We sit there and there's an aircraft on ground, needing to have maintenance, and we tell them it's a 30-week lead time. Well, now that aircraft's not running its mission and it's not carrying people. So, the part of the industry we play in is one that I love, because maintenance, overhaul, repair, sustainment is always needed. We have 3 different parts of our business. We've got our products that we manufacture, strategically source and service. We have another business unit we stood up back in 2018, which is a new facility we just opened up in Windsor, consolidated 2 locations to a bigger facility in Windsor, which does asset management. So we have our customers' assets that we manage for the life cycle. And then we started a FAR 145 repair station back in we got certified by the FAA in 2017, but we launched the business in 2023. So now we have not only the products that we manufacture and provide and supply to maintain the aircraft or engine when it's in for service, we also manage the customer's assets, and now we have flight components that we touch. So it's really cool when you take a look at what we do. Very rarely can you walk outside now and look at any aircraft that's flying, and whether it's fixed wing or rotary wing, commercial or military, that we don't touch in some manner, which is pretty unique for a business of our size.
Tell me a little bit about the people that you employ. How big? I know, you're a smaller size manufacturer, but you still have quite a lot of people that you're serving.
Yeah, we have just over 55 employees. So from a size standpoint, it's not a huge amount of employees. We've had more. We were close to 90 just as COVID hit, and then we lost 50% of our business overnight on the commercial side. We helped people as long as we could, and then we had to resize the business back in 2021. But I love my employees. I can't compete on just alone. Just can't. You can go right down the street to Pratt & Whitney and get a lot more money. You can go to some other companies and get paid more. So what we have to compete on is what's the value we create for our employees. We try to pride ourselves in a strong culture. I try to pride myself as being a transparent and open leader, because sometimes people tell me I probably share too much at all hands meetings, but I don't care. I think people should know exactly what's going on in the business. And, when I look at some of the employees that have been there for longer than 40 years, and some of the employees, I would say at least half the business has been there longer than me. That means a lot. And so now it's my responsibility, and it's my team's responsibility to make sure that those employees continue to feel valued, provide value, and make HABCO a place that they want to retire at. And I know in many cases people won't, and that's okay. And if so, part of my objective is if somebody decides to leave HABCO, and they're going to, people are going to explore pastures are greener, so be it. But if somebody can go and double their salary, I can't compete with that. So I have to take solace that if they can double their salary, then we did something right to make them more valuable.
Yeah, you
for
helped
them,
train, upskill.
And that's what we focus on from a direct labor standpoint. One of our objectives is 100% cross training. We do not have a single person in our entire business that only does one thing. Where as we were growing and the only thing we could do is throw bodies at the demand, we had people that only did one thing. And so, for example, they were just a welder. And if welding was slow, but mechanical assembly was super busy, they'd sit there twiddling their thumbs. And so we focus on how do we get them cross-trained so that we can flex the people so that I can grow the business and not have to grow the labor at the same rate. That's as much as I'd love to hire 500, 1,000 people in the state of Connecticut, there just aren't that many people available. And I don't think it's the right thing to do is just go steal people from our friends that run businesses down the street. So how do we reduce the skill level required? How do we use the programs and the technology available to do that? How do we get our folks who are employed to focus more on using their gray matter and using their minds versus doing a lot of things that are just transactional or rote? And so how do we make their lives better and grow the business at the same time?
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, especially for something I'd like to get into a little bit later, which is kind of taking advantage of some of the programs and things because of your unique size. Well, I say unique size, but really you're many manufacturers across the state, many businesses across the state. That's the size range that we have here in Connecticut. So I think, business leaders can learn a lot from you and what you've been able to take advantage of to continue to grow while keeping that workforce size similar, at least over the past few years now. But I do want to talk a little bit about how you first got involved with CBIA. I know you were involved for a long time with CBIA's affiliate Constep, and we go back to that lean training, but talk us a little bit about that first meeting story.
Yeah, but actually you're right. It started with Constep, and I was fortunate to be able to be on the board of Constep for 10 years under Bonnie Del Conte, but I started off with Constep before that, back when I was at HID, because Constep used to administer the Shingo Prize, which is a big lean award. It's kind of the Nobel Prize for manufacturing. So I got affiliated with Constep with Bonnie's predecessor, and then when Bonnie took over as president, she invited me to participate with Constep on the advisory board for Shingo, which turned into join the board, which was only supposed to be for a shorter tenure, which then we redid the bylaws, which allowed me to stay on for another term. And so and the reason why I got involved with CBIA is Joe Brennan was on the board of Constep then. And, my first real interaction with CBIA was being on the board of Constep as Joe was looking to retire, Bonnie was looking to retire, and I was part of the core group that worked on the affiliation between Constep and CBIA under Governor Malloy's administration with Commissioner Catherine Smith and having all the discussions with the crew then. And Joe had asked me a few times to join the board. And to be honest, I said no a bunch of times. I just felt it was, my impression at the time was it was a political thing. And that wasn't something that I had an interest in doing. And I also didn't have the bandwidth with everything else going on. But then when I finally had to get kicked off the Constep board because I hit a 10-year max, Joe asked again, and I asked for a 1-year reprieve, and then he finally convinced me to join the board. So when I joined the board, it was Joe's last year. Chris DiPantima was actually the chairman of the board. And so I started getting involved at the changeover between Joe and Chris and Joe's retirement. So I think that was 2018 when he asked me to join, 2019 when I started coming to the board meetings. My first board meeting was September Madison meeting in 2019.
And that's really when you started getting involved, more with CBIA's organization as a whole.
Yeah.
What struck you the most?
I was definitely taken back by those first board meetings and the not the culture of CBIA, but the way others, especially within the political landscape, spoke about CBIA. It was not I remember my first board meeting. It was Joe Brennan was at the dinner before board meeting. He was facilitating a discussion, and it was a nasty discussion. It was, a lot of angst towards CBIA, and it was a whole bunch of political back and forth. And I give Joe a ton of credit.
The discussion was with lawmakers at the time.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. And just Joe, I just felt like how Joe kept his cool. I was admired. Like I was admiring that because I don't know if my Italian side probably would have kicked in and I probably would have gone a different direction. But that was like the first board meeting, dinner. And then I go to the board meeting the next day and I'm looking around the room and the majority of the people had their laptops open, and just board members. And they're, I can't tell whether they're taking notes or doing emails. And there just wasn't, it just wasn't a lively, productive discussion. In fact, one of the board members, I won't name him, good friends with him, but one of the board members was actually talking in that board meeting about how there's greener pastures if you move your business out of state. I'm like, this is the CBI board meeting. And so I had to make a decision at that point. It was, okay, do I just be a person that's on the board, or do I really start getting more involved listen, if time is precious, and if I'm going to dedicate my time to an organization, I want to give it my all and I want to make a difference. And so, we started off on, I was a little bit quiet in that board meeting, but what I really liked seeing over the time was the changeover of the people that are on the board. I think the board is a lot more involved. It's a lot more cohesive. I actually give, I talk to Chris about this all the time. And I know I mentioned you guys, like I love CBIA. I love that CBIA has a personality now. I mean, how many different events do we have that are sold out? It has a personality. And that's, I think that's a combination of a lot of things. I think it's Chris taking what Joe worked so hard for so many years to do and take it to the next step. I think it's so much of selecting the right people to be on the board and doing things to engage board members, because if we can get proper engagement, then we can make a difference. If we're not going to have proper engagement, then we're just checking a box or putting something on our resume to say we were on the board. So, yeah.
Where do you think you found that the most? Obviously you said it was kind of that engagement that's necessary, but I mean, a lot of other business owners, it's finding the right time and having enough to give. Where did you kind of pull that from for yourself?
Because I can't, I can't be a person that makes comments and doesn't do anything about, and I'll give you a quick anecdote from years before. I mean, this early in my career, I got asked to, I got interviewed for an article in a magazine. It was a manufacturing magazine. And one of the comments I had made was back then, I think this is probably 2003, 2004 timeframe. And I made the comment how nobody grows up wanting to work in manufacturing unless you want to be an engineer, right? Everybody looks at the skyscrapers, myself included, and want to work in the corner office. You don't look at a manufacturing company and go, that's where I want to work. And I said, part of the problem was because no schools talk about careers in manufacturing outside of engineering. And I was talking about lean and a bunch of other stuff. And then the dean of the business school at Eastern Connecticut State University had read that. And then he reached out to me and said, you're exactly right. How would you like to put a program together for us and come teach it? And my first reaction was, no, I don't have time for that. But I'm like, well, I'm the one that opened my mouth, so I can't say no to it. So
publicly too.
Yeah, publicly. So, I wound up teaching adjunctively at Eastern for 5 years. Just one class, spring semester was a lean management class, and put a curriculum together, and I loved it. And so that for me, like, that's why I go back to that, because you're going to open your mouth, if you're going to say something, if you're going to have an opinion, then if you finally have a forum to be able to do something about it, do it. And, I love teaching. That was a great thing for me. It was selfish, to be honest, a little bit too, because I was able to take my top students and bring them on as interns and hire them. And it's so fulfilling for me today to run into people who are students of mine who took that class, not knowing, might have taken it as a blow-off class, might have taken it just as an elective to fill it. And how many people now have careers in manufacturing, and they come up to me when they see me and say, thank you, for at least having that as a class. So that's kind of why, that's kind of my feeling when it came to the CBIA, or whether it was a Concept board or any board that I'm on, is if I'm going to be there and I'm going to take time away from my family, take time away from work and my work family, I got to make it worth my while and worth the organization's while.
And how does being involved with CBIA, other organizations, how has that helped you kind of take advantage of different programs the state has to offer, and other ways to just even, bouncing ideas off of other manufacturing leaders? Yeah,
I think CBIA for me is a really interesting organization, because almost all the other organizations I've been part of in the past are very narrow. whether it was, AME, the Association for Manufacturing Excellence, whether it was Constep, which was just manufacturing, whether it was ACM, which was just aerospace. CBIA is so broad. And that's one of the things I really, really, really appreciate about it. I mean, be able to network with folks from, from banking, all the different services, from banking to tax audit, to, you're going then to manufacturers, you're talking about travel and entertainment, travel and leisure, like every industry is touched. And so for me, that's been fantastic, because now my circle of influence and the people that I can learn from and, steal shamelessly from is much wider, and the focus and the experiences are very different. And so that's a big piece that I've loved, and that because of that, that's how we get to learn about some of these other things that are available. I love CCAT and Ron and Angelo and what he and his team is doing there. I try to take advantage of every penny possible, because funding a growing business is difficult. And so if there are programs available that can help, why not take advantage of it? And so, I learn about these programs from being part of organizations and from networking and leveraging the relationships.
So you mentioned a little bit how at the beginning you were a little hesitant to be involved with CBIA's board, and now you are number one cheerleader.
I was number one, but yeah.
Tell me, where did that passion come from?
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of passion. I have a lot of passion for Connecticut. Some of it is, I have a huge passion for my business. Obviously, I have a lot of passion for my employees, and I have passion for their families, and I have passion for my family. And I've grown up in Connecticut. I've been here pretty much my whole life. I met my wife here. She's from the Midwest. She and I met at the library at the university where I was getting my MBA. She was getting her undergrad, and she set her career. She's got an amazing career, far more successful than mine is. So she built roots here from a business standpoint. I've, grown the business here in Connecticut. We've raised our two daughters here in Connecticut. So, I definitely have a lot of passion for it being, helping make Connecticut a better place. I've seen a lot of great things, right? When you look at what goes on in the state, we've seen some amazing companies move to the state. We've seen some amazing companies start businesses here in the state. We've seen some amazing talent come to the state. We've seen some amazing talent grown in the state. But then the other side of it, we've seen some of the challenges. We've seen companies leave. We've seen people leave. We've seen companies maybe stay, but move the value add, move the manufacturing out of state because it's too expensive. I've seen customers, make major decisions purely based off of cost. And Connecticut is not a low or even medium cost state. So, when I take a look at where all my passion comes from for making Connecticut a better place for my employees, for their families, I take a look at if businesses grow, we create jobs. If we create jobs, then we help families flourish. If families flourish, then the communities are going to flourish. If the communities flourish, then the state becomes a better place. So I just find that it's an organic growth thing. And if I've got passion for my family and my employees and their family, and I've got passion for the state, why not get involved and try to make a difference and try to at least continue to influence that and try to change a little bit of that us versus them mentality when it comes to legislation. It doesn't need to be business versus legislation. It doesn't need to be legislation for companies versus employees. It doesn't need to be an us versus them, because there's so much legislation that is one and the same. And that's where I get frustrated sometimes when we take a look at, this is a pro-employee policy versus a pro-employer. That can be one and the same.
Was there ever a moment for you, that moment of clarity where you said, okay, maybe I can make a little difference?
No, not a specific moment, but I just definitely felt the calling with, hearing Joe early on and watching that first board dinner and just seeing this is not the way it's supposed to be. And I think at that point in time, I was like, okay, I'm either going to go door A, which is run, or B, jump in. And, I'm really glad I did. I don't have a lot of bandwidth when it comes to time. And I wish I could participate in a lot more of, just the get-togethers. And because there's just some wonderful, wonderful people that are involved in CBIA. There's, and I don't care what role you're in, whether it's CBIA or whether you're in the legislature and you've run for office, everybody's trying to do what they believe is in the best interest of the state. Now it's aligning that to make sure that we continue to move the state forward. Like I said earlier, we're not going to win, but if we can continue to move up the charts with the ratings, we continue to move up the charts with, just everything that we look at from a strategic plan, then we're doing our jobs.
And as you kind of step into this role, you have seen past chairs before, what they've done, where their passions lie. What are you hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, it's first of all, it's humbling to even think that I'm sitting here having these conversations, because I remember first sitting at some of the board meetings and I'm like, good. That's good that you're doing that.
Only 6 years ago too, right?
Yeah. In fact, Chris was the chair at the time, and it went from Chris to then if I have this right, probably went from Chris to Jen Morgan to Jeff Hubbard to Rena Patel to Matt McSpedden to Kevin Griggs to Marietta and now me. And then you take a look at the diversity of each of those individuals and those businesses, from banks to legal to service organizations to manufacturing, large organizations, small, male, female, and it's just it's a wonderful group of people that have sat in that role in the past. And the way I look at it is, you can't win. There's nothing to win. And I'm not going to, at the end of my 1 year, it's not like Connecticut has a chance to win in whatever it is, because you look at what we do for a living in a career, it's about continuous improvement. And that's all that I look at from this, is leveraging what's been started for decades and decades. I mean, CBI has been around for hundreds of years, right? And, how do we continue to use CBI as a bridge, as a voice to continue to affect legislation, continue to affect business owners, continue to affect business leaders, to continue to help make Connecticut a much better place, a much more affordable place to run a business and raise a family.
Are there any specific, even policy areas that have been really important to you recently?
I wouldn't say specific policy areas, because, I think one of the things that I get frustrated sometimes is we just don't have clarity and visibility into what policies are really going to be coming down the pike. When I take a look at being a small business, much different than being a big business. Now, we have the same challenges, with the same employee challenges, customer challenges, industry challenges, family challenges, but in a small business, it reverberates much deeper. And so we don't have the breadth, and we don't have the, thousands of people to leverage across that. So, when I look at that from a HABCO standpoint, how do I combat that? Because we know that there's going to be some legislation that comes out that catches us by surprise, and whether or not we have a say in it, sometimes I feel like it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, and you don't know where the cut's coming from. And so the way small businesses have to react is just by being lean and being nimble, and managing the business based on a culture of transparency and trust. And so, when I take a look at the legislation, I want us from a business standpoint to be able to help get more predictability and be able to have legislation that's passed that it's good for both business and employee. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So that's, I like some of the focus that we have from a CBI standpoint. When you look at workforce development, workforce housing, you look at just the business climate, those all help. But at the end of the day, it's across the board that we have to focus on to making businesses more affordable.
And how can you be aware of what's coming down the pipeline and prepare for it, right?
Yeah.
What are they talking about that is probably going to be passed and go into effect 6 months from now that I need to, pivot to? Correct.
Because before, if you're not involved, you hear about it when it's too late. And, again, we may not have the direct ability to completely change somebody's mind, but I think with the voice that CBI has, with the personality that CBI has, and I've seen it over the years, we've definitely, been very successful with leveraging the voice to influence, and in many cases get legislation passed or killed that is important for us.
All right, now we're going to kind of circle back to, some of what we talked about a little bit at the beginning, just, your growth as a leader, some of the things that you've taken away. A lot of business executives are listening to this podcast, maybe not in manufacturing, maybe across in another industry. What advice do you have for them? Yeah,
I'm not an advice giver, but I maybe I'll share some things that have been helpful for me along the way. It's hard to believe, I still feel young, but I'm not as young anymore. And it's hard for me to believe that I'm the oldest person on my executive team now. Normally I've been on the younger side. But what I've realized over time is people don't follow titles, they follow trust, right? And trust is not given, it's earned. And you earn trust through transparency and through building that culture. And, that's how I try to grow the business is, have that culture of trust. And for me, it's, what I've learned along the way is I can read all these books, all these different leadership styles, and you can watch. I've had many bosses over the time and many senior leaders who I like some of their styles, and you try to emulate it. It doesn't work for me. It's just not who I am. And there's other ones like, I don't like the style, but it's effective. Let me try that. I'm like, oh gosh, no, that really didn't work. And so for me, what I've learned over the time is okay to be me. I love, I'm a different, I'm a different type of person where, I get to know every single one of my employees. And maybe it's easier when it's 55 employees, but I've been doing it as long as I've been in management, where I sit with every single one of my employees, 1, 2, 3 employees a week. And I just keep rotating through the business, take copious notes. I've got decades of books of these skip level meetings. And my goal is, how do I make their life better next year? So when I look back, when I have the meeting with them, I talk about what their complaints or their frustrations were the prior year, and is their life better now? And if I just keep focusing on that continuous improvement mentality, building that culture of trust, it's okay to have a relationship, like a professional relationship, to know about people in the business, where I feel sometimes executives want to separate themselves from that. And I remember there was a young woman that was new to the business, and I was doing my skip level meeting with her, and she just was like, I cannot believe I'm sitting in your office. I cannot believe you want to have a conversation with me. I've been working in businesses for years, and no senior executives ever had a conversation with me. And it just blows my mind. So for me, I like the idea of make a friend before you need a friend, because when that tough call happens, when we have a business decision, we have something that we need to do, people won't look at me as making a decision based purely on numbers, because they trust me, and they know, they know that we've been working on this business together. So that's, one thing for me is definitely the people don't follow titles, they follow trust. And I think the other thing that I've learned along the way is, and it's okay to be, it's okay to be me. I'm a faith-based person. I used to always be, not ashamed, but afraid to say how, like I get up every morning and I work out early and I sit down and I do my devotional every day, right? I don't talk about it at work. If I all of a sudden mention it, earlier in my career, I'd be like, oh, I don't know if I should have said that. And I don't care now, because I think that's a big part of who I am. It's a big part of where my heart is. And it's a big part of, me growing a business based off treating people the way I want to be treated.
I think that's great. And I think it's also, just so interesting when we started talking about that first business trip, and you getting trust in that, what you thought was a, big CEO at the time. And now you're doing it a little differently, bringing them in their office, but in a similar way.
Yeah, because I think leaders you got to find what works for you, and what I've learned along the way too is, what motivates one person doesn't motivate somebody else. So the more you get to know people, then you can figure out what motivates them. And, if we work together, certainly what motivates you is different than somebody else. And I need to know that, because if I try to motivate you by hitting you over the head, because I know somebody else likes to be spoken directly to, then you get all upset and now you no longer want to work with me. But if at least I know what makes you tick, then I can manage you appropriately.
That emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to working with you more throughout the year. And thank you for listening to this week's BizCast. You can listen, like, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a review and let us know if you have ideas for a future podcast. And for more episodes, head on over to CBIA.com.